Oh,
Using the lab?
you know, I can't walk away, and this camera's in your face anyways.
Oh yeah, that's like right there.
Is this on? No.
Here.
So I tend not to. Oh, it's mute. Okay. I tend not to use the lav here because it goes right in your eyes.
Yeah, normal. Because I think normally the screen goes like halfway up. And
Yeah,
then
it's
so when
okay.
you're, like,
And plus, there's no clicker here, so it's okay. I don't need it because I'm not going to travel.
Okay.
Yeah, and in this room it's not so bad. 401, you tend to want to move away.
Yeah, right.
I don't know why. This works okay, the angle to see everyone. And like I said, this is like...
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't need the lav.
Okay. Oh, here's a little... Well, I guess you don't need it.
Oh.
It's always in like here.
Oh. What? I'll use this.
Does it have more? Are there more than 2 songs?
What?
I don't know.
Oh, no, there is.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah. I'll use this.
Okay.
You could undo that. Hello, we might as well get started. So we're back here, not in 401, if some of you, and also the survey results were very interesting, and I'm going to use them in the presentation. So I upped the ante. If you did submit your uni, instead of $10, they're $20 Starbucks cards. So, but if people aren't here, then anyway, I get to keep them. That happens every year, and then I just roll them to the next year. But actually, I maybe distribute them. So today I want to talk about quality improvement, process improvement. I can never figure out which is the right thing to say, and sort of what the methods and tools. And it should be interesting because I'm going to try and show you projects that students worked on, which will kind of make it like we're not going to take one project and walk it through an improvement, but I wanted to actually show you some of the production that students have done over the years. So we're going to look at process literacy, the science of process improvement, and then how the tools work. Those are sort of the objectives for today. So there's a ton of approaches to process improvement or quality improvement. One of the early ones, I don't know if you've heard of PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act. It's from the 20s. Very simple. You got a plan. You want to do something. You check how it's working. Is it working, not working? Do you modify it? And then you act on that, and then you go around again, and it's a cycle. You're going to see the notion of a cycle in all of these process improvements. So this is sort of a classic one. Some of them also say plan, do, study, act rather than check. So you'll see PDSA, but it's one of the original ones, and it's at the core of many of them. Lauren Powell was here 2 weeks ago and talked about the Virginia Mason production system was based on Toyota. You know that SLIM is the name for this module, and our whole thread is sort of a play on lean. Lean being getting rid of waste. That's really the core way they look at Toyota. And there's many different types of waste, overproduction, waiting for things, and you see the list there. It's a very back to basics approach. The customer comes first, and it leads to quality improvement. Now, they did get themselves in big trouble a few years ago with the accelerator pedal, and we don't really have enough time to talk about that, but one thing you could think of is quality on the manufacturing line is not the same as safety when you're distributing products worldwide, and it's something for us to pay attention to in patient care. Quality and safety are actually two separate disciplines and things to think about. So I don't want to make you think that Toyota has figured out the safety problem. And now we're seeing in multiple manufacturing companies where safety, once you distribute millions of products, how fast it could go viral when there's a problem. And so this is a graphic that shows, you could find waste everywhere. In your own life, I can imagine you waste time. So if you wanted to get really lean, you wanted to get slim, you would get rid of waste. In fact, at the end of today's class, I'm going to have what's called Slim Manage Myself. We did this last year, and I found one of the really good ones that I like. Sort of like, what's your take-home from all this if you're going to apply it to your own production system? Six Sigma is another approach. It basically is the Six Sigma symbol is 3.4 defects per million. It's an American thing. It came out of GE and all these different companies. It has a cycle, defined measures. I mean, they all have cycles. What they're trying to do with Six Sigma is reduce variation in the sense that if you're producing 1 million products, they literally want to have only 3.4 of those products with defects. Obviously, the accelerator pedal, that was a problem. The airbags, the Takata airbags, that's a problem. So in all these companies, in fact, I don't know if any of you have ever suffered through a GE appliance. Because the problem is when they do have defects, they make millions of them, and they end up in our homes and on the roads, and now you have a serious problem. It's all about getting rid of variation. Now, does anyone know this table? When you look at the different, it's a log scale. So when you look at defects per million, Six Sigma is 3.4 defects per million, and it's like 34, I don't know, 0.010% error rate. That's the error rate that if you get on an airplane, the likelihood of you crashing and dying. Does anyone know what the error rate is for the proper administration of post-MI medications? Like beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, things like that. Anyone want to guess what the defect rate there is? Higher. Higher. How high? It's actually 2. It's a sigma 2, which means basically 30% of the patients, and this is tracked over time, who go home from a hospital are not properly medicated as per the guidelines. And that's after correcting for people that is contraindicated or not. So it's exponential. You go from 34 0.010% to 31% error rate. That's why they like to use this. Then in the, I guess it was in the early 90s, late 80s, out of Harvard Business School, this was the ultimate American approach. So when we look back at the Japanese approach, which was about getting waste out of the system, customer comes first, there was the Re-engineering Work, Don't Automate, Obliterate paper book that came out by Michael Hammer out of Harvard Business Review. He was an MIT computer scientist. And this basically, such an American approach. And there's a lot of cultural things that go on here. Their approach was basically, you got a company, it's not doing well, blow up all its work processes, start fresh, and do it new. And it got a lot of bad press because what happened was it would be a reason to have mass layoffs. And it became a problem, but it's actually got some core parts of it that are actually really important, but it's a very American approach. And it was synonymous with downsizing, which you wouldn't know, but it was like a very 80s into the 90s thing that was going on in American manufacturing. So that it had a cycle. So again, every one of these has a cycle, but here it was sort of like throw away the old and bring in the new, which is not the way they did things in Toyota. So this is where, before we even get into another method, I want to caution you about methodologies. What you don't want to do is become a zealot for one of these methods. I'm kind of telling you. I'm like hoping that you never, like, I'm a this and I'm a, because like Six Sigma, they have black belts. So there's all these people that get certificates. And one of the things that's fascinating about Toyota is hundreds of thousands of people from around the world have gone there to try and study what Toyota does. And they basically have all failed. Even in Japan, it didn't work. But Toyota expands globally and it works. And so, like, what's the problem? Virginia Mason is really quite an exception, that they were actually able to take Toyota's methods and apply it in an American institution, let alone a healthcare enterprise, and make it work. And Steven Spear, at the Harvard Business professor, he interesting insight where he basically says that people look at the tools that they're using and think that's all you need to do, that you just apply the tools and the magic will happen. And it's absolutely not true. What goes on is this culture. It's a culture change of this belief in continuous improvement. And they have systems thinking, and then they actually apply what they do very strategically. They don't carpet bomb their organization. So it's way more than just the techniques. I know that NYP years ago, so this is back 8-9 years ago, they were very big on Six Sigma. And they had all these black belt, engineers who they would have deployed to projects. And it just withered on the vine. They didn't get anywhere. Because it's way more than just getting special people with techniques who are certified to come into your organization and work on teams and make change happen. It's much more than that. So just caution about if someone tells you, hey, there's a great method, we're going to use it. So another thing that I hear a lot about, and it sort of bothers me too, the science of improvement. What is the science behind all this? It's pretty easy for a company like Toyota to measure their improvement in how many more cars they sold or how many defects they have or something. In healthcare, I mean, that's really hard for us to measure. Are we really going to change morbidity and mortality? Are we really going to make a dramatic effect in the infection rate and stuff? That's really hard to do. So what happens is an institution, I don't know if you know about rapid response teams. It's one of the things that people studied over the years. Institutions decided that you would have a group of people who, based on the physiological parameters of patients, if the patients were on the edge of going into failure, a rapid response team would move in, they would take over the case, and they'd turn the patient around. It was wildly successful early on. People implemented it all across the country, and then folks started doing really in-depth studies on, was it beneficial? And those trials actually didn't didn't bear fruit. They didn't show the improvements that some of the early pilot projects that were just not in one place, or all across the country. So it really plagued people. And Berwick wrote a lot about it, and he's one of the mavens of patient safety and quality. And some of the stuff that you have to step back and think about, the OXO approach, which is what we're kind of used to in randomized trials. You observe something, you perturbate it, and then you observe again, and you control for things, and you randomize. They don't work well in social programs. And so, the folks that go into third world countries and try and implement various projects, they know this really well, that these randomized trials don't work. So what they look at is more of what's the context? What's the mechanism, and what's the outcome? And when you think about it, when you're doing a workflow process change, and you've got, carbon-based creatures, us, involved, there's culture in all of that, and that's and a context. That's not like you could just make a perturbation like you could do at a molecular level. So Berwick recommends if we're going to do this, and we're going to call it a science, and we need proof, then you have to look at different methodologies. What are your thresholds? What trust and bias? And then, what's actually going on in the organization? So here's some interesting questions. Rather than saying, where is the randomized trial, he's basically saying, what is everyone learning? So this is one of the critiques that you'll hear when you talk about process improvement. People will say, I hear what you're saying, but, where did they do the randomized trial that showed that, this intervention, it makes a difference? It's weak right now. I did a bunch of research in this past year on the science of improvement, and there's a lot of critique of it out there. That's not to say we shouldn't be doing it, but it is an area that hopefully will become more fruitful. So I mentioned a little about culture and context. If you're going to talk at all about processes, and you're going to be literate in it, you have to understand that the culture of an organization, so we know what that is. This is, I don't know how much you know about the medical center. Fascinating culture. We opened in 1928. 1928. What happened right after we opened? The Great Depression. Okay? So think about this amazing, first academic center in the country. It cost $5 million to build. It was P&S, it was PH. A lot of the buildings that are here now were here then. It was like a 1,200-bed hospital. And within 1 year, it went into the Great Depression. And from day one, it became this scrappy organization that has all kinds of strange culture because it had to survive. I've read the history books and stuff. I still see the stuff in our behaviors. So basically, we just keep learning from the people who were there here in the beginning. So it's broad, it's stable, it explains a lot about organizations. But then you put context on top of it. So what's the context? What happened in 2008? We had a recession. So I got here in 2007, we were losing money, and then we got hit by a recession. That's on top of an organization that has a culture coming out of the Depression. So you have to understand all that when you want things to change. And I watched Dr. Goldman put a whole new financial model in at the medical center, with that culture in that context. And then you have to understand the systems. Here the systems are interesting. We've got NYP is a separate corporation from Columbia University. Columbia University supplies the physician staff, not the residents, but the attendings, to the hospital at NYP, and they supply the residents, the nursing staff, and all the other ancillaries. Those two systems coming together on top of a culture and a context that's varying over time, you got to start to wonder, okay, if you're going to make a change, you have to deeply understand all of that before you just go recommend, we'll change the process. As evidenced 2 weeks ago, the family medicine situation was last week. Was it last week? No, 2 weeks ago, because we were in here, and we basically introduced when Lauren came. That was a lot having to do with exactly what we're talking about here. What are the systems? What's the culture? What's the context? It's kind of easy to just sit there and say, well, it shouldn't be that way, but guess what? That's the way it is. So if you're an improvement team, you got to understand all three of these elements. You miss one of these, and you could just forget about your project. So here's a little bit of a rhetorical question: which is more important? See, I can tell that you're having trouble because you've been trained on the answer, right? All the tests you take, all the things you do. Which is more important? I don't hear. The question, of course, it's rhetorical. So it's actually kind of fascinating. I never really thought about this. I was at a business school, symposium. There was some guy from IBM, dressed up really fancy and whatever. But he came out with the statement, fall in love with the question, not the answer. And I went, oh, of course. So when I was young, the kid that had all the answers was the kid you wanted around. Because, I mean, we had no devices. I mean, you had to go to the library. I can remember calling the library. Did you know that you used to call the public library and ask them, like, how many bushels of wheat do they produce annually? And then they would actually put you on hold, and they'd go to a book on a reference book, and come back and tell you the answer, and you'd use that in a school project. I kid you not. Okay? And we all used to do that because we were told by the teacher. So the answer was absolutely critical in the old days. Right? Now, let's say you go to a party, and everyone's sitting around the table, and people all of a sudden say, God, I wonder, how does this work? What do you all do? You Google it immediately. So, and who's the best person in the room? The person who Googles the best. Actually, when you think about it, that's the best person to have around. The person who could formulate the best question, not the person that knows the answer. Because the answer is easy if you ask the right question. So this has become very fascinating in our new world and the modern paradigm. In fact, it sort of puts all of what we're doing in education at question. So you still memorize a lot of stuff, right? Like a lot of facts. I don't know. You could look it up, right? So so what's the right balance between the question and should we be training you to ask really good questions? Or should we be training you to be full of answers? But why is this important in process improvement? Well, Charles Kettering, the Sloan Kettering Institute, he said a problem well defined is a problem half solved. So if you could understand your problem and basically be able to ask questions about what's going on around you, if you get really deep, you get in there, once you understand it, you basically half solved your problem. You don't have to be a brilliant. You don't have to come up with an answer. So last week, some of you did the pet peeves exercise, and the other half of you will do it today. That's what we're trying to get you to learn, how not to talk about solutions, but to talk about problems. And I know that it's, who wants to talk about problems, right? So in fact, this is like the cardinal sin. This is what we all do. We love, if someone says, I got a problem, what do you like to do? Oh, let me help you. And how do you help? You're like, this person doesn't even get the sentence half out, and you're going, oh, you should do this, and you should do that. And it's this sort of jumping to the solution that actually gets in the way of actually solving the problem. It's just this human sort of nature, at least as an adult, not as a child. If you think about children, they spend an inordinate amount of time asking questions, right? Do you ever notice that about kids? They don't have any solutions. They don't know anything, but they're going to grill you on questions. But somewhere along the way, we become this answer machine, okay? And it derails problem solving. So remember I said don't fall into methodologies? So what I've done is created a methodology. I'm just kidding. I've sort of aggregated tools that we use in our projects here at CUMC and the courses I teach and the people I work with. And it's a cycle. In fact, in the middle of it, you could see Plan, Do, Check, Act. You can see on the top left is, okay, what problem are we trying to solve? And then there's these tools that you use to go around to eventually come up with a solution. And what you've seen, you should recognize a couple of the names because we used it last week and we're going to use them this week. So I'm going to take you around this cycle and show you examples of output from students from various projects to give you examples. The first box is brainstorming. You've probably all done this. I don't know how formal you've done it. It's not really a step. You brainstorm the entire time. If you look into this, so what was forget the book, I'll think of it. They wrote about this. This actually came out in the late 40s. The guy that wrote this, that came up with brainstorming, he actually wrote a book called Your Creative Power. He was an ad agency executive. And people tried to figure out, why were they so good at creating ad ideas? Because this is the early Mad Men era. And one of the things he came up with is brainstorming, and he basically listed, it was like chapter 34 of this book, he listed these rules. And you've probably heard about this. You get together with a bunch of people, you all sit around, and they tell you, don't criticize people, no dismissing. Don't say, oh, that's a stupid idea. It's a very open way that, the idea is that everyone gets their point of view out, and then you're going to be so ingenious. And turns out that no one ever studied it. Okay, talk about science of improvement. So from 48 until recently, people just sort of took it as, okay, this was how you did it. And it turned, in 2003, some folks at Yale, they basically debunked the whole thing. They did a really rigorous psychological study. They divided people up into 3 groups. They took people with no instructions, just come up with ideas. They took a group, traditional brainstorming, no criticizing, no dismissing, everyone gets to speak. And then they had a group in the middle where they said, you're going to do brainstorming, but just be yourself. If someone comes up with a stupid idea, critique it. Right? Which group do you think came up with the most valuable ideas? The one with the critique. Yeah, so I know it's a little painful to be in a group where you have to sort of fight for your right to say something, but it turns out that's sort of self-critical, and the group working together, it's much healthier and you come up with better ideas. So it's less pleasant but more productive. So brainstorming is within this entire methodology. So flowcharts. Some of you may like this flowchart. This was done in a 4th-year course where I had them do projects. They picked the process of paying rent. They even had the name of Mr. I can't even say his name, Schnepp. Is he still here? The person anyway, this was a few years ago. And what they did was they were really plagued by how housing facilities worked, and the towers in Bard Hall and paying rent. And they went and they started to study this thing and discovered where the problems were. And this was one of the first things they did, was they built a flow chart. So when you're thinking about a problem, you have to try and figure out, how does it currently exist? If I go back to this diagram, it's kind of like up there on the top right, it's called the as-is state. How is it today? As it is today, because you have to understand that very deeply, so you want to draw flowcharts. So you get together, you draw boxes, you draw arrows, you try and figure out what the heck is going on here. And this was amazing, poorly managed. Drove the students crazy. But they came up with some interesting findings. Here's a swim lane diagram, a very complex flow chart. The reason they call it swim lane is there's all these lanes, and everyone is swimming in the pool together, working on this large project. This turns out, Andrea did this. I said, gee, we need a swim lane diagram. I didn't have any ones that you could relate to, so I said, how about Bard Hall Players production? And she tells me this is about 1/3 of the actual activities, maybe, or half. Very simplified. And the pinkish red line on the far right is the production that will be happening this weekend, right? Okay. So, what do you do with this? Well, it turns out, I just sort of blew it up here, you can see how the club administrator, the BHB presidents, the directors early on are doing these steps and where information flows. And so I said to Andrea, I said, okay, you did all this, like, what did you learn? And it was kind of interesting. She wrote back to me, and I told her that I would out her here. She wrote, certain things that we can get started on sooner than we do. That was an interesting insight, because when you map it all out, you realize you've got all this dead time that people working on this massive project maybe could start earlier. And the other thing that they noticed is the production crew, who kind of puts all this stuff together, they have a lot of time where they could be bonding and being a team before they have to be a high-performing team when they have just a few days in the end. So those were just some simple insights because she drew the diagram. So, that's the sort of the lesson here is by brainstorming and then drawing the picture, you have to sort of get concrete. And then in that step of getting concrete, you start seeing issues. You may see loops in your workflow. You may see gaps. You may see delays that get you to ask more questions. There's a fishbone diagram technique. So let's say this is actually very timely. I'll tell you why it's very timely. This was a 4th-year students were critiquing that there was not enough exposure to emergency medicine in the P&S curriculum. And it turns out that, on average, I think it's anywhere from 8, and some years it's even more, 12 or 15 P&S grads go into emergency medicine, yet the exposure here is rather limited. I think it's a short elective. It's not like a core rotation. And then they looked at, so that's on the far right, and then they looked at so that's the true problem, and the causes: lack of time in the major clinical year, availability of space, institutional difficulty. So those are the causes, and the reasons under each one are listed. And what this allows you to do, and Ishikawa was Japanese, and he liked this technique, and some students actually made the picture of a fish, but you could see why they would call this a fishbone diagram. It allows you to pack a lot of information in a very small amount of space that allows you to start to think about what's behind what's going on. So just last night, the reason why this is actually rather timely, Dr. Goldman at the faculty council meeting. So you know there's this, the Senate downtown. We have a PNS faculty council that members, we meet here, and then some members, things go to the Senate down at Morningside. He announced that we're looking into, and actually very far along, towards starting a Department of Emergency Medicine in the medical school, rather than a division in the Department of Medicine. So there'd be a chair of emergency medicine. It would elevate the program. They would do academic research. The residency program that exists would still exist, but it would be of a different caliber. And one of the interesting, one of the reasons that we could talk about it, he actually showed pictures of the construction of the new ER, and sure enough, the students identified that: lack of space, institutional difficulty, recognition of need. So it actually, I'm not saying to students that, you know, the leadership of Columbia looked at this presentation and decided to do emergency medicine, but they could have used this information because it's all right here. So that the power of a fishbone diagram. So another thing that came out of Toyota was the 5 whys. This is when I talked about children. This is a very interesting technique. So Taki Ono was one of the lead architects. He said, observe the production floor without preconceptions, with a blank mind, repeat why 5 times to every matter. Very Zen. This is very Zen. So what they would do, like the engineers who are like designing things, things would be coming off the assembly line broken. So they wouldn't like sit there and have a meeting in a conference room. The engineer would go down literally and stand for hours and watch everything go by. And every time they saw something, like someone tried to put a door on and they they had to jimmy the door, they would ask why 5 times to every problem. And then what they say basically, when you get to the end of the 5 whys, you basically understand what's going on. You understand what the cause is, the root cause. The reason why I mentioned children is, so what do children like to do? They like to ask why. And what do grown-ups like to do? What's the famous word that grown-ups like to say to children who ask why? Because. So what do children immediately do? They say, why because? I mean, and because they get it. They want to ask why 5 times. Now, here's the problem. If the adults in your world, every time you ask why, say because, how long are you going to persist asking why? You're basically going to get stifled, and you're going to become a grown-up who never asks why, or doesn't go deep. So it really is how to figure out the 5 whys is channeling the child in you and sort of getting past the hang-up of like waiting for the because. So here's, this was, you'll love this. This was another 4th year elective. The students were looking at why the lectures in PNS, this is not School of Nursing, were not as effective as they thought they should be. So they started asking why. Well, they started with this: the preclinical curriculum is ineffective. Why? The lectures are not taught well. Why? Variability in the content and the approach, right? Because some are good and some aren't. Why? The lecturers act individually. They come, you give an hour lecture, whatever. Why? Well, there's no organized manual. There's nothing that tells them how to present to students. Why? No one made one. So the students here were making a case at a root cause that people who come and teach should be given guidelines on, what's a good lecture? What do you need to give to students so that they understand and learn, rather than just sort of tell your story about your molecule or your finding or whatever. So that's an example of the 5 whys. All the way to the left is sort of the problem, right? And to the right is kind of like you would call it a root cause. You could make a document and give it to any faculty member and say, you got to start with objectives, you got to do this. You know, you shouldn't have, you should never put something on the screen that you say, I know you can't read this. That's like the most commonly, broken rule. And, faculty members, and they all fall into the trap. They go, oh, I guess you can't read it, but, up there's a lot of information. So you just need a few guidelines. That's what the students thought. So that's an example of the 5 whys. Going back to the cycle, so that we just sort of made the turn. These are just tools that get you deeper and deeper into understanding the problem, but at some point you need some data. Like, how bad are the lectures? How many lectures get rated poorly versus good? Who does give good lectures, et cetera? So you want to gather data. So I show down here there's various techniques. So what I've done is I used the survey results. 79 of you responded. I wish we had more data, but that's what we got. And then 5 of you get $20 Starbucks cards at the end. So hopefully you're all here. I want to show you like some of the data. Now the first one I'm going to show you is spaghetti diagrams. We didn't get any data for that, but this actually was work done by Tristan Hunt, who's I guess he's in his 5th year or whatever. I think he's graduating in the spring. He was working on a problem of supply closets in Milstein. So he literally, believe it or not, went with a clipboard, a stopwatch, and a pencil, and he sat in supply closets in Milstein, in literally dark supply closet, waiting for people to walk in the room and turn on the lights and look for supplies. So he drew here nurses going into the supply closet in Sixth Garden South, and extremely efficient. And you could see how much time it took them to find various products, things that they needed for their work. Nurses in the audience will recognize that, these are the type of supplies that nurses would look for. So, and then he looked at residents going into the supply closet. Okay, so maybe they have ADHD, I don't know but anyway, you start to see that there's a problem, a big problem. Over here you were looking at 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Here now they're spending minutes in there, and and you see them bouncing all around. He had a time of his life. The fact that he was able to do this is quite remarkable. And then when he basically overlaid it all. If this doesn't hit you right over the head, okay? Now you basically went deep into what the problem is. It's really clear what the solution is. And everyone that looked at this said, well, we know what the solution has to be. Turns out that nurses in Milstein work in the same unit. And the nurses are in charge of where things go. So of course they're going to quickly find the products that they're looking for. The residents, they're all over the hospital. No one asks them where to put anything. So every closet they go to, it's like the goldfish that's going through the plastic castle, Annie DeFranco's song. Every time they go in, it's like a brand new castle. Okay? So it takes them 2 minutes on average versus, now if you add up how many times residents go in the closets, it could be a half an hour of their day wandering around supply closets. So they came up with a really easy solution. An MD cart, because matter of fact, if you go back here, there's literally no overlap between what nurses look for and what MDs look for. Occasionally, the residents look for gauze and things like that, but that's not that often. They're mostly looking for procedure-type devices. So they're going to put together an MD cart that the nurses could move around the room, but as long as the resident can see it, they'll know that all the supplies they need are there, and that could be like a half-hour savings, and the solution was really obvious. And the picture, you all laughed, right? Isn't it? It's amazing. So now we get into the survey. So this is what's called a check sheet or a tally sheet. You answered these questions on the left. You worked out, you ate healthy, you had a few drinks, you studied 2+ hours, you see the counts. It's called a tally sheet because it's quantitative versus like a check sheet, which is like, check marks and you cross out, with a 4, with a 5. You could see in there, if you look carefully, that there's some correlation between drinking on Fridays and then, so it's kind of hard to see the relationship of things. But if you then start to do a run chart, which basically we show graphically in a run chart, should have 14 points, but we weren't going to ask you for 2 weeks of data, so we're going to fudge it a little here. You could see that studying kind of goes down on the weekends. That's expected. You got a social life. You could see that eating healthy kind of goes down with the week, and working out, it's kind of variable, but it's kind of even, which is probably reflective of your age. That's what I would say. So then, remember, we left one question out. Okay. Yes, I had 1+ alcoholic beverages. And interesting that studying and alcohol don't go together, for sure. For sure. Because if any of you had a cocktail and thought you could read a book, you know what happened next. You were sleeping with your head in the book. So, this is an example where looking at the data, run charts are very powerful. Control charts are like a sophisticated version of them. You'll see in ICUs where you monitor patients, heart rate and respiratory rate and things like that. And they're very powerful to see trends. I thought you'd get a kick out of this trend. This was where we asked you your rent per month. So pretty much, 40% of you paid between $900. This is per person per month. You basically pay around $1,000 a month. But there's some significant outliers. A few of you are basically getting off really easy, less than $500. And some of you must live on Central Park West at over $1,600 per person. So, it's not a Gaussian distribution. There's quite a spike there, but it does tell a story here. So looking at like lab turnaround time, that's a common use for a histogram. Like how long does it take me to get back my specimens and what can I learn from that? Pareto chart. So this is where we asked you your main childhood hometown. And you could see California, right? Wow. That's a long way from California. I didn't expect to see so many people, wildly from California. And so what you do in a Pareto chart, I don't know if you know, it's the 80-20 rule, the law of vital few. Pareto was an Italian economist. He didn't come up with the title Pareto. Someone in the 20s decided to call it after him. But what he had discovered, interestingly, he basically determined, not surprisingly, that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the people. Okay. That's kind of common. But how he thought about the principle, he was a gardener. And he realized that 80% of the peas in his garden came from 20% of the pods. And he went to work the next day and said, does this hold true for other situations? And it's actually, you've all used the 80-20 rule. So it turns out that if we look here, now we do a little bit of arbitrary cutting off. There's other in there, and other are a few people that are international. Turns out that 11, let's just say other is a state, 11 states account for 80% of you, at least of the people who answered the survey. That's exactly 20%. 80% of the people come from 20% of the states, just exactly as the Pareto rule would predict. I have no idea why. I don't know why California is so high. I don't know if I didn't separate P&S versus School of Nursing. I don't know what's going on here. But it makes me want to ask some questions. What's it about California? Why would you come here from California? Anyway, anybody have an answer? Big state. Okay, a lot of people. It's there's a recruitment that goes on, you think? I'll have to maybe I'll look at the data and do this twice. Oh, okay. Okay, interesting. Okay, see, that's what you do when you get the data. You start to dive into it and then look for patterns. Did a scatter plot of, this is to look for correlation. Hours of exercise last week and hours of study last week. So we asked for 1 week, how many hours did you work out? How many hours did you study? And you see the trend line. If there was a direct correlation, you would basically just see a line going, diagonally across. And then and right now, there's basically, not surprising, a very slight negative correlation. The more you study, the less you exercise. But what's interesting, when I look at this, is there's some interesting outliers. Like somebody studied 80 hours. Or 60 hours. Now, I was told that this was the week that the P&S students were preparing for their neuro exam. Now, that's a pass-fail exam. I don't know why someone studied 80 hours. But someone did exercise 20 hours and studied 30-plus hours. That's amazing. That's quite productive. But the rest of you were just sort of, there's a bunch of people who aren't exercising, so I think you got to worry about that. There aren't a lot of people who are only exercising and not studying, though there's a few of you who only study like 2 hours in a week. So, but you exercise nearly 15. So anyway, it's fun. I don't know what this is telling us, but it's interesting. So we go back, and so that's kind of, I just want you to think about just looking at things, asking questions, trying to come up with what the heck the real problem is, not what you think the problem is, getting some data, getting the data to make you ask questions. The coming around the cycle where you want to design a new way to be, it's not that important at this stage of your career. And the same techniques are used, brainstorming and flow charts. You basically just say, well, we're going to change something. We're going to do something new, and we're going to see how it goes. And then we're going to monitor, with run charts and control charts. And then, maybe we'll redo it again a few times. But really, if you could get good at analyzing the problem and not talking about solutions, you're home free. So Slim Manage Myself. This is a technique that I use. It's called Do, Delegate, or Delete. It's how to deal with your inbox. How many people have hundreds of things in their inbox? Oh, my God. Right now, I probably have 5 things in my inbox, and I operate like all the IT here, and I teach these courses. And so what I do is I do it immediately, I delete it, or I delegate it, right? I give it to someone else to do. Now, I understand that you don't have the wherewithal to delegate unless you want to send it home or to your friends, but you could create a project. You could say, well, this is going to be a little bit of work, and take it out of your inbox and create a folder that then you're just going to watch as a project. But the reason you don't want a big inbox is every time you touch something, you have to look through it again and again and again. You're wasting so much time. It's like the resident going into the supply closet. The old days, people with stacks of paper on their desk, they tell you, I know where everything is, but every time they go in there, they got to sort through all the papers, and then what happens is halfway sorting through the papers, you go, oh, I hadn't read that in a while, and then you never get to the thing you want to do. So manage your inbox. Do, delegate, or delete. And how do you prioritize? This is a famous statement, eat the frog. The frog is the thing you don't want to eat it first. You make a to-do list, and you find the thing you least want to do, and you just do that one. So I'm going to show you a very interesting to-do list. This is Johnny Cash's to-do list. It sold for $6,500 in 2010. Look at what he wrote on there. I love this. It's amazing. Which do you think is the frog? Not kiss anyone else. I don't know. Isn't that amazing? That's amazing. Go see Mama. That's really cute. Kiss June, not kiss anyone else. The fact that he had to tell himself to pee, that's really fascinating. And not write notes is the note that he wrote to himself. It's really fantastic. So that's, even Johnny Cash kept to-do lists. We just don't know what he would have circled. And then the survey response winners. All right, who of you are here? Okay. Well, that means I have 4. No, I'll find the rest of you. You can come up and get it. I upped the ante to $20, so these are really valuable now. All right. So we're going to go off now. Any questions? I know this is all real easy, right? Any questions? Any comments? All right. So we're going to split up again into the multidisciplinary rounds and then into the pet peeves over in Hammer. Thank you. Where are my survey winners? Oh, my God. All right. Thank you.
it's gotta get dizzy. You know? It's gotta be dizzy. Yeah. Stuff like
Yeah.
places.
Yeah, we're doing this run pop around.
If the lights happen, it might stay there. That's so dumb. Wow. Okay. Nice. We had nothing at all to do today.
Still want her caffeine. Yeah. So I went to
I wasn't Texas. Yeah.
Do you remember both
Yeah. I don't know that building. That's where we're looking for breaks. Anything happens to them away.
the platform? You need that.
Perfect.
Probably need that.
Garbage bag.
So that
Even if it was like definitely in the closet, it would still be an impossible task.
Yep.
That ability added the possibly in the closet is real. I guess
So we went to the closet earlier and looked for it like this, but we didn't figure out where things are. So yeah, that
Are those springs like crazy expensive? Or
I don't know.
I bet they just like that hardware store probably
yeah, they
very niche item. Today? Cool, yeah, so we needed an hour and a half, is what you're saying? Why are they seeing the one scene?
Hello!
Hi Mikey.
How are you, friends?
I'm good. Have you slept at all?
A little.
A little bit of sleeping?
A few hours.
Okay, that's not enough usually.
That's fine.
I guess.
I'm just glad that the ladies are...
They're good? They're happy times?
They're happy times. I'm going to have to watch them today because we didn't have PDQ, so there will be people who are out there late, and we're going to have to pause for that, but that's fine. That's life. It's life. It's life. It's life.
Describing life, it doesn't sound that good. No sleep. Well, it's rich stuff.
It's great. I mean, I never thought that we weren't allowed to, but then I suddenly heard that we don't touch it for me, so I don't really know.
This, like, we can do like curve and stuff on screen. Like, we touch the screen.
I mean, in classrooms, I, as a private student, have touched the screen. It's like, can I do it as a PNS student? Can I be like, oh, yeah, I want to study this room?
Okay, Steve, you got here early,
Yeah.
and you noticed that the screen was down.
Yeah.
Up. You know, so it's up.
No, you noticed the screen was down and knew that we had BHP rehearsal, so took it upon yourself.
Yeah, blame it on the grad school.
No, blame it on the person who's not the president. We're good. Press the wrong button. Jeez.
don't we distribute like an e-program?
Because we still have to make it.
That's right. Okay.